He thought ignoring her would make the meeting easier, but he had no idea she was about to rewrite the rules. The towering glass doors of Whitman Realty gleamed under the mid-morning sun, reflecting the bustling city streets of Chicago below. Emily Parker adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel, a quiet determination in her blue-gray eyes as she stepped past the doorman who barely glanced her way. At 32, she had long learned the art of moving through high-powered spaces unnoticed, her soft-spoken demeanor and simple attire often making her invisible to those chasing deals and ego. Inside the office, the polished marble floors echoed with the clicks of expensive heels, and the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new leather from the plush chairs in the lobby. Jonathan Whitman, the real estate mogul whose name alone commanded attention across the city, sat at the head of the long mahogany conference table, his tailored navy suit immaculate, silver cufflinks catching the light as he scanned over a series of documents. He barely looked up as Emily was ushered in by his assistant, her plain blouse and modest skirt a stark contrast to the crisp lines and expensive fabrics surrounding her. She offered a small, polite nod, placing her satchel carefully on the floor, her fingers brushing the edges of a tablet she had prepared. Jonathan's lips curved slightly in a knowing smirk, one that had silenced many ambitious agents before her. "I hope you understand, Ms. Parker, that this isn't a playground," he said, his tone lightly mocking, drawing the eyes of junior associates who shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Emily's gaze remained calm, fixed on the data projected onto her tablet. She had anticipated this, every skeptical glance, every underestimation, and it fueled a quiet fire within her. Around the table, the room seemed to lean forward unconsciously, sensing an invisible tension as Jonathan's eyes flicked up briefly to acknowledge her presence with measured disdain. Emily moved with precise economy, opening her notes, arranging charts and projections, her hands steady despite the subtle murmurings and exchanged glances from the surrounding staff. Outside, the city thrummed with life, unaware of the drama about to unfold within the glossy walls of Whitman Realty. Her mind raced not with panic but with strategy, recalling market trends, zoning regulations, and investment angles she had analyzed for months in preparation for exactly this type of encounter. She spoke softly, almost as if to herself, confirming figures and double-checking assumptions, her focus absolute. Jonathan shifted slightly, adjusting his tie and leaning back, his expression a mixture of amusement and mild irritation, certain he had already won before she had spoken a single word. Yet, there was something in Emily's calm, deliberate movements, the way her eyes scanned every document with meticulous care, that made even the sharpest junior analysts glance twice. The assistant whispered reminders to Jonathan about schedules and client calls, but his attention was divided now, drawn in despite himself. The room's lighting glinted off the glass tabletop, catching the attention of those seated nearest as Emily Parker prepared, silently, to turn what seemed like a routine meeting into a moment that no one in that room would soon forget. Every paper she touched, every annotation she made, moved with purpose, a prelude to the revelation she had carried quietly into the heart of Whitman Realty. Emily Parker settled into the chair across from the long conference table, the soft hum of the air conditioning blending with the faint tapping of keyboards as the junior analysts returned to their workstations. She pulled out a slim notebook and began annotating figures with a calm precision, her blue-gray eyes tracing market trends and property valuations, noting discrepancies that most professionals would overlook. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp angles across the polished wood floor and illuminating the subtle tension etched into Jonathan Whitman's face as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, observing her every move. Outside, the city roared with the usual rhythm of Chicago traffic, yet within the glossy walls of Whitman Realty, a quiet anticipation settled over the room. Emily's fingers moved steadily, highlighting projections, sketching potential investment strategies, and cross-referencing data from municipal records she had meticulously gathered over the past weeks. Her focus was absolute, her breathing even, unshaken by the whispers and sideways glances of colleagues who had expected her to falter. Jonathan adjusted his tie, a flicker of doubt passing across his usually confident expression, and for the first time, he noticed the subtle authority in her quiet posture, The way she handled complex calculations with the ease of someone entirely in control of her knowledge. Emily spoke softly, almost to herself, summarizing trends and pointing out emerging opportunities in neighborhoods overlooked by competing firms. The words, measured and clear, carried a weight that even the analysts at the far end of the table could not ignore. Her explanations were precise, data-driven, and delivered with an unassuming clarity that contrasted sharply with the overconfidence and preconceptions of the mogul who had underestimated her. Jonathan's gaze flicked between the tablet she was holding and her composed demeanor, the lines of his face tightening as he began to grasp the depth of her understanding. Around the room, the subtle shift in energy was palpable. Junior associates leaned forward in their chairs, notebooks poised, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Emily Parker continued, her voice calm, explaining a complex financing structure, suggesting alternative approaches to securing investment capital, and identifying strategic opportunities that others had dismissed as marginal. Her timing, her logic, and the way she connected disparate data points created a framework that was both innovative and executable. The hum of the air conditioning and the occasional murmur from a distant phone call faded into near silence as attention focused solely on her words and the clarity with which she articulated a plan that had the potential to change the trajectory of the company's upcoming deals. Jonathan Whitman cleared his throat subtly, realizing that the simple woman he had ignored was methodically presenting a comprehensive strategy that challenged his assumptions and demanded his respect. Emily's calm confidence filled the space with an understated authority, each point she made reinforcing the undeniable skill and insight she possessed, leaving those who had doubted her, including Jonathan, in a state of stunned awareness of the quiet brilliance that had always been there. As the meeting progressed, Emily Parker continued to unfold her insights with a measured confidence that drew the attention of everyone present. She tapped on her tablet, bringing up a series of charts highlighting demographic trends, property valuations, and potential investment returns that had gone unnoticed in previous assessments. The afternoon sunlight glinted off the glass walls, casting patterns across the polished oak conference table, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Jonathan Whitman's posture shifted subtly, the smirk that had lingered earlier replaced by a furrowed brow, betraying the first signs of genuine curiosity. Emily spoke with clarity, connecting complex financial models to real-world outcomes, explaining how minor adjustments in zoning strategies and timing could yield significant returns. Her hands moved deliberately, pointing to specific data points, adjusting graphs, and annotating trends with quiet precision, each movement conveying expertise and command without raising her voice. Colleagues who had initially exchanged knowing glances now leaned in, eyes fixed on her, absorbing the nuances of her presentation. Every statistic, every recommendation was backed by meticulous research. Emily's ability to synthesize the information and present actionable strategies left no room for doubt about her competence. Jonathan shifted again, resting his chin on his hand, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully as he followed her logic, realizing that the insights she offered were not only innovative but also immediately applicable to the firm's upcoming transactions. The energy in the room shifted imperceptibly, the previously light, almost dismissive atmosphere became charged with anticipation and respect. Emily's voice remained calm and steady, each sentence precise, devoid of flourish yet rich with substance. The junior associates whispered quietly to one another, impressed by the depth of analysis and the ease with which she communicated complex ideas. Emily highlighted potential risks and opportunities with a level of foresight that only came from extensive experience and sharp analytical thinking. She suggested partnerships, identified gaps in the market, and proposed strategies to maximize returns, all articulated with a quiet authority that drew everyone's attention naturally. The room, once filled with subtle skepticism, now felt the weight of her intellect as Jonathan Whitman leaned back, a slow recognition dawning on his face. For the first time in the meeting, he considered her not as an outsider or a simple assistant, but as someone who could influence major deals and shape the direction of the company. Emily Parker, in her composed and unassuming manner, had transformed the meeting from routine evaluation into a masterclass of strategic thinking, leaving everyone, especially Jonathan, to reconcile their initial underestimation with the undeniable skill unfolding before them. The hum of the city beyond the windows faded into the background as the conference room focused entirely on her calm yet commanding presence, the calculated articulation of ideas, and the quiet power of her expertise, making it clear that Emily's contributions would not only be heard but would fundamentally impact the outcomes of Whitman Realty's future deals. Emily Parker paused for a moment, letting her gaze sweep across the conference room as if measuring the impact of the insights she had just shared. The soft lighting highlighted the glint of glass and polished wood, reflecting the careful arrangement of charts and documents she had meticulously prepared. Jonathan Whitman's usual confidence wavered slightly, his hand brushing across the edge of the table as he processed the depth of her analysis. The associates and staff around the room, who had initially shared knowing glances and quiet skepticism, now shifted in their seats, leaning in as if drawn by the invisible pull of her intellect. Emily's calm voice resumed, breaking down complex financial projections into actionable steps. With a precision that left no room for doubt. She outlined alternative strategies, emphasized overlooked opportunities, and connected multiple variables into a coherent plan that could reshape the upcoming deal entirely. Every word, measured and deliberate, carried authority without arrogance, and the energy in the room subtly shifted from expectation of failure to anticipation of revelation. Jonathan adjusted his posture, leaning forward slightly, his eyes narrowing not in skepticism but in focused attention as he began to see the potential of the strategy laid before him. Emily's hands moved smoothly across her tablet and printed charts, highlighting key numbers, tracing lines of reasoning, and demonstrating potential returns with clarity that invited understanding even from those less familiar with the intricacies of the market. The air in the room seemed to thicken with concentration, the usual murmur of typing and paper shuffling fading into near silence as everyone focused on her methodical presentation. The room was no longer filled with quiet amusement or condescension, instead, it resonated with a sense of engagement and subtle awe. Emily navigated potential objections before they were raised, her anticipation of questions and thorough preparation making her responses almost effortless, each one reinforcing the authority of her voice. Jonathan's smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of concentrated evaluation as he followed each step of her reasoning, tracing implications and recalculating assumptions in real time. Around the table, whispers of approval and surprise traveled quietly, and the initial tension gave way to a palpable respect that seemed to radiate from Emily's calm demeanor. Even the assistants and interns who had lingered at the edges of the room were now attentive, observing how her subtle confidence and precise articulation commanded attention without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture. Emily Parker's quiet composure, combined with the unmistakable clarity of her strategic insights, had transformed what had begun as a routine and dismissive meeting into a turning point, a demonstration of competence and vision that, subtly, yet unmistakably, shifted the perception of everyone in the room, leaving Jonathan Whitman and his team to reconcile their prior assumptions with the undeniable evidence of her expertise. Emily Parker finally lifted her gaze from the tablet, her expression steady, and addressed the room with a quiet authority that drew every eye toward her. She outlined the projected outcomes of her proposed strategy, connecting property acquisitions, timing, and investment flows into a cohesive plan that highlighted overlooked opportunities with precision. The soft lighting in the conference room reflected off the polished surfaces, emphasizing the calm determination in her posture, while the subtle tension that had defined the meeting since her arrival began to shift. Jonathan Whitman leaned slightly forward, his hand resting on the edge of the table, eyes narrowing as he processed the implications of her suggestions. Each point Emily made was reinforced by data, and she presented alternative scenarios, demonstrating the flexibility and depth of her analysis. The junior associates, who had initially smirked and whispered to each other, now watched silently, absorbing the nuances of her presentation and taking note of the clarity with which she communicated complex ideas. Emily referenced city zoning updates, historical trends in property valuation, and upcoming market shifts, weaving them together into a narrative that was both thorough and actionable. Her voice remained calm, measured, and confident, carrying authority without a hint of arrogance, and each sentence seemed to settle the air in the room, replacing doubt with the recognition of competence. Jonathan's posture shifted subtly, an unspoken acknowledgement that he had underestimated her, and for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the full potential of her recommendations. The atmosphere, once filled with low murmurs of amusement and quiet condescension, grew still, the only sounds being the subtle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional flip of a page. Emily highlighted opportunities for partnerships and investor engagement, explained risk mitigation strategies, and connected the numerical data to practical steps for execution, all without raising her voice or relying on any theatrical gestures. The room responded unconsciously, heads tilted in concentration, eyes followed her gestures, and a shared awareness of the impact of her ideas settled over the conference table. Jonathan Whitman's initial skepticism had dissolved entirely into focused consideration as he began to envision the broader implications of her plan. Even the staff who had been peripheral observers could not help but feel the shift, recognizing that the woman they had dismissed possessed a level of insight and foresight that few in the room could match. Emily Parker continued, detailing the financial structuring and scheduling, her calm, deliberate explanations leaving no ambiguity and ensuring that every participant understood the strategy fully. The subtle authority she exuded had transformed the meeting from a routine evaluation into a moment of revelation, leaving Jonathan and his team to reconcile their prior assumptions with the clear, undeniable expertise standing before them, and in that silence, the full weight of her preparation and intelligence settled over the room, commanding recognition without a single raised voice. Emily Parker took a deliberate breath, allowing the impact of her presentation to settle over the room as she prepared to guide the discussion toward implementation. The sunlight streaming through the glass walls highlighted the subtle shifts in posture and expression around the conference table. Jonathan Whitman sat upright now, his eyes attentive, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the polished wood as he processed the strategic possibilities laid before him. The junior associates and staff remained quiet, captivated by the clarity and precision with which Emily articulated every aspect of her proposal, connecting financial data, market trends, and investment timing into a cohesive framework that left little room for misinterpretation. She spoke with steady authority, detailing the steps for executing the plan, anticipating potential obstacles, and suggesting contingencies that reinforced the feasibility of her recommendations. Each sentence was carefully measured, her tone calm yet commanding, drawing in the attention of everyone present without the need for dramatic gestures or raised voices. Jonathan adjusted his glasses, leaning slightly forward, his earlier skepticism replaced with a measured respect as he traced the logic and foresight embedded in her analysis. Emily referenced zoning regulations, property appraisal patterns, and investor interest projections, seamlessly connecting abstract numbers to tangible outcomes that made the scope of her strategy immediately clear. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, absorbing not only the substance of her ideas but the quiet confidence with which they were delivered. Even the assistants and interns who had lingered at the edges of the meeting now leaned in, recognizing the depth of her preparation and the precision of her reasoning. Jonathan cleared his throat softly, the first audible acknowledgement of the shift in perception, and nodded slowly, indicating that he understood the potential impact of her approach. Emily continued, methodically outlining scheduling, financing, and coordination efforts, all the while maintaining a steady rhythm that conveyed mastery and control. The soft hum of the office, the faint clatter of keyboards, and the muted murmur of distant conversations faded into the background, leaving the room attuned entirely to her voice and the meticulous clarity of her explanations. Every point she made reinforced the undeniable competence she brought to the table, leaving no question as to her capability or authority. Jonathan's expression softened slightly, an unspoken concession to the fact that the woman he had underestimated was demonstrating not only knowledge but vision, foresight, and the ability to influence outcomes in a way that demanded respect. The room's atmosphere, previously charged with quiet skepticism and mild amusement, now radiated focus and attentiveness, a silent acknowledgement of Emily Parker's command of the situation. Each participant absorbed the implications of her presentation, understanding that her insights would not only inform decisions but shape the trajectory of Whitman Realty's upcoming projects, leaving an indelible impression of competence, poise, and strategic brilliance. Emily Parker finally pushed her tablet aside, letting the weight of her analysis linger in the room as she allowed the executives and associates to absorb the full scope of her recommendations. The polished oak conference table reflected the ambient light, highlighting the deliberate movements of her hands as she gestured subtly to emphasize key points in her strategy. Jonathan Whitman leaned back in his chair, his usually confident posture now tempered by thoughtful consideration, the faintest crease appearing on his forehead as he traced the logic of her insights. Around the room, the initial murmurs and side conversations had completely faded, replaced by an attentive silence that focused entirely on the quiet authority Emily projected. She spoke again, calmly and methodically, walking through contingency plans and outlining potential scenarios for market fluctuations, each explanation precise and supported by data, demonstrating not only her understanding of the current environment but her foresight into potential developments over the coming months. The junior associates, who had begun the meeting with skeptical expressions, now exchanged glances that carried a mixture of admiration and astonishment, realizing that the simple woman before them possessed a depth of knowledge and strategic acumen they had not anticipated. Emily continued to highlight critical connections between property availability, investor expectations, and timing for maximum profitability, presenting her arguments with clarity that left no ambiguity and invited comprehension from every participant. Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks subtly, his eyes narrowing in concentration as he mentally traced the implications of each recommendation, understanding that her suggestions could alter the trajectory of multiple high-value transactions and potentially redefine the firm's approach to key investments. The quiet confidence in Emily's demeanor created a natural rhythm in the room, every pause and emphasis drawing attention and reinforcing the substance of her proposals. Her voice remained measured, steady, and unassuming, yet it carried the authority of someone who had anticipated every possible question and prepared every answer in advance. Staff members who had previously remained in peripheral roles now leaned slightly forward, absorbing the intricacies of her strategy and noting the precise balance of innovation and pragmatism that underpinned her recommendations. Jonathan's expression softened slightly as the final points were made, a subtle nod acknowledging the effectiveness and comprehensiveness of her presentation. The room, once filled with quiet skepticism and mild amusement, now hummed with an unspoken recognition of Emily Parker's skill, intellect, and strategic vision, leaving a lasting impression that would influence not only the outcomes of the current deals but also the perceptions of those who had initially underestimated her. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint reflection of sunlight on glass and wood underscored the calm authority she maintained, demonstrating that true expertise could command attention and respect without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture, leaving Jonathan and the entire team with a profound awareness of the depth of her insight and the quiet power of her preparation. The room remained suspended in quiet attention as Emily Parker concluded her detailed exposition, the polished surfaces of the conference table reflecting the subtle movements of her hands as she collected her notes. Jonathan Whitman exhaled slowly, leaning back and folding his arms, his earlier amusement and skepticism replaced by a palpable respect that softened the stern lines of his face. The junior associates and staff who had initially whispered and exchanged glances now sat upright, absorbing every word and gesture with rapt attention, aware that they were witnessing an extraordinary display of strategic insight. Emily moved deliberately, sliding her tablet back into her satchel with a sense of measured finality, her blue-gray eyes meeting the gaze of each participant in turn, conveying confidence without the need for raised voice or dramatic flourish. She summarized the key takeaways with clarity, emphasizing practical steps and achievable outcomes, and the room responded with subtle nods and quiet acknowledgement, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word spoken aloud. Jonathan shifted in his chair, the weight of realization settling over him as he considered the potential implications of the strategies she had outlined. His eyes scanned the assembled team, noting their reactions and the unmistakable spark of engagement and inspiration that had replaced the initial doubt and dismissiveness. Emily's calm demeanor, combined with the precise articulation of complex market analyses, had created a natural rhythm and focus within the room, drawing attention effortlessly and commanding respect without overt assertion. The soft ambient light caught the edges of her notes, the sleek tablet, and the carefully arranged charts, framing her presence in a subtle yet compelling way, reinforcing the authority she carried through preparation and quiet confidence. The air seemed charged with a mix of admiration and contemplative energy as everyone present processed the depth and breadth of her insights, acknowledging the foresight and skill she had demonstrated. Jonathan adjusted his tie and allowed a small, measured smile to appear, a silent concession to the ingenuity and command Emily had displayed throughout the meeting. Associates and interns at the periphery of the room exchanged impressed glances, understanding that the simple woman they had underestimated was in fact the guiding force behind a strategy that could redefine upcoming projects and elevate the firm's performance. As Emily Parker gathered her materials, the room remained hushed, the earlier tension replaced by a shared recognition of competence and vision, the atmosphere imbued with a sense of anticipation and respect that would linger well beyond the conclusion of the discussion. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the occasional shuffle of papers, and the faint reflection of sunlight on glass and would serve as subtle background to the quiet triumph of preparation, intellect, and poise, leaving Jonathan Whitman and everyone in the room with the undeniable impression that Emily Parker's contributions would shape the firm's future decisions and the trajectory of its most important deals. As the final moments of the meeting unfolded, Emily Parker collected her notes with deliberate calm, the subtle confidence in her movements reflecting the authority she had maintained throughout the discussion. Jonathan Whitman sat back, the polished surface of the conference table reflecting the faint crease of thought on his face as he absorbed the full impact of her presentation. The room, once filled with skepticism and quiet murmurs, had transformed into a space of attentive focus and understated admiration, the energy now centered entirely on her. Emily spoke briefly, summarizing the key elements of her proposed strategy and reinforcing the practical steps needed to execute each component, her voice steady, deliberate, and infused with clarity. The junior associates and support staff, who had initially observed with doubt or curiosity, now nodded subtly, acknowledging the precision and foresight she had demonstrated. Jonathan adjusted his posture, a slow and measured smile appearing, a silent recognition of her insight, expertise, and the undeniable influence she had just exercised over the direction of their projects. Every recommendation, every nuanced observation she had offered, had not only addressed immediate concerns but had illuminated broader opportunities that had been previously overlooked, leaving the executives to reconsider their assumptions about both the market and the capabilities of the woman before them. The soft light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast patterns across the polished wood and glass, underscoring the quiet yet compelling authority she carried. Emily's manner remained composed and unassuming, demonstrating that intellect and preparation could command attention and respect without the need for elevated voices or overt gestures. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, considering the implications of the proposals and the innovative connections she had drawn between property trends, investor priorities, and strategic timing. The room was silent except for the subtle shuffle of papers and the low hum of the air conditioning, each participant processing the shift that had taken place, the silent acknowledgement that Emily Parker had transformed what was expected to be a routine meeting into a decisive turning point. Her foresight, meticulous analysis, and calm execution left no doubt that her input would shape the firm's actions and decisions in the weeks and months ahead. As Emily Parker gathered her materials and prepared to leave the conference table, the air remained charged with respect and contemplation, the previous underestimation replaced by an awareness of the depth of her preparation and the breadth of her influence, leaving everyone, including Jonathan Whitman, to silently acknowledge that true capability often resides in the quietest of individuals, and that brilliance can command attention without raising a voice, commanding the room with poise, intellect, and strategic clarity that would resonate long after the meeting concluded.